Welcome to the Brag Effect, where we share easy to understand customer service tips from business owners and leaders that will help you get your customers bragging about you in all the right ways. Hi, I'm Mike Wells, and together with my co-host Michelle Adams. Hey Michelle.
Hi Mike.
A big thanks for joining us.
Today we're speaking with Jackie Hanafie, who's the founder of HumanKind Advisory and Hey Lily. She runs a strategic communications and public relations consultancy from her home base in Canggu, Bali. A trained journalist, she's spent the past 10 years working with nonprofits, entrepreneurs, startups, and thought leaders to help them craft and tell their stories, to influence public opinion and connect with their customers and audiences through innovative storytelling. So today we're talking with Jackie about how we as a business and brand can better connect with our audiences through our values and what we stand for. So I hope you really enjoy the insights that Jackie shares. Let's jump in. Hi Jackie, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, how are you?
Really good, thank you. Good. So can you share with us what is your role and how you support brands and with your HumanKind Advisory?
Sure. So I established HumanKind Advisory about a year ago now, although I've been doing this work for almost 15 years. And I work in the public relations space and the advocacy space, influencing change. And we sort of help my clients do that through strategic storytelling, messaging, and I help a range of organizations too. So, small business, startups. I work with CEOs and founders, non-government organizations, really the full spectrum to help them tell their stories in a meaningful way, connect with their consumers or their audiences, and ultimately, influence change, whether that's, change in consumer behavior or change in a policy, even through storytelling, some kind of influence and change.
So these terms are thrown around a lot. We hear them a lot now with ESG, CSR. Can you explain those terms? And even though they may not be reflective, if we're in a corporate sense to a P&L line, why is this important that we have an understanding of this, and how can we educate or share that message with our consumers or potential customers today?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. ESG, and for those of your listeners who don't know what that is, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. And then you've got corporate social responsibility as well. And they have always been a key focus in the corporate world, very important to investors in terms of, how these corporates are faring in terms of their impact in environmental, social, and their governance and sustainability. But I think, what's becoming evident now really is that while these terms or these ways of building businesses and connecting with investors and reporting to investors has been really important. Increasingly, environment and sustainability, social justice, ethical management have become really important and meaningful to consumers and customers, especially among millennials and Gen Z. We all know that, I think, well, maybe we don't all know, but it's becoming evident that especially younger generations, they're really prioritizing brands or organizations, companies that stand up for what they believe in and are doing good things for the environment or social justice causes. In terms of millennials, there was a study recently by Morgan Stanley, and it found that 86% of millennials are interested in sustainable investing, and that millennial investors are more likely to integrate sustainability into their consumer behavior. And I think, as millennials they're becoming employees, buyers, investors, business owners. They're looking at positive corporate action and rewarding those brands that are doing that with loyalty. There was a McKinsey report actually that estimated that 60% of millennials worldwide are willing to spend more money on brands with a corporate social responsibility commitment. And then, moving to Gen Z, who obviously have increasing buyer power now, and increasingly they have power to influence household spending. They do really care about sustainability, so much so that they're less price focused than previous generations. There was a study in May last year that found that Gen Z are actually 1.4 times more likely to pay a premium for eco-friendly products. So wow. It's interesting.
So if as a business, if you were to say give some advice to a organization or business that hasn't really played a lot in this space yet, and not sure kind of how to start, what are the key things? I mean, what are the key things that you would ask them to kind of get them to think about? One, what is that? What is their story? And then it'd be great to kind of talk about some of the ways that they can communicate that with their audience.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Behind every brand, obviously, there are people, and so I think, we all have what we value. We're all different, obviously, but, the things that we value, whether it's, reducing carbon emissions, or whether it's reducing plastic, or all of these sort of things that talk to sustainability, even social justice movement. I mean, that's moving it one step further again. Whether it's racism or gender equality or whatever it is. I mean, we're all humans, and there are humans behind the brand. So all brands really have an opportunity to stand up for something, and that's usually driven by either the CEO or the founder, and also looking at their consumer base and what they might think are important as well. So there is opportunity definitely for every brand to consider how they're acting ethically and responsibly and sustainably. And there are a number of ways, obviously, that you can do that, whether it's, as I mentioned, gender equality, sort of, having policies in place that you employ a certain quota of, making sure you're employing women, or whether it's race or whatever it is, reducing carbon emissions. Maybe since COVID, many organizations and small businesses and brands have gone online. So how are you reducing your carbon footprint? All of those things really are sort of speaking to this sustainability and ESG movement, whether you realize it or not. And so I think the first thing really is to kind of sit down and figure out what are the things that our brand stands for. You'll know yourself, even sort of scrolling through Instagram, there are so many ethical brands now, or for purpose ethical brands, and brands that haven't necessarily talked about it in the past. You'll see that they are talking about it more, and they're even making it part of their key messaging, I suppose, in a real pivot to connect with the audiences that I just spoke about, who really value ethical and for purpose.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's, say, in the sustainability space. It could be just they're giving back to community, or something that they're doing in their local area that is really special and important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Localized social responsibility is great. And even, many organizations now are donating a percentage of their revenue to a cause that aligns with their business, perhaps, or a charity, or their sort of, even down to volunteering. Many organizations and corporate volunteering, they send out their corporate workers into charities and soup vans and all sorts of things to kind of do that extra bit for the planet, I suppose, or society. So it can be really anything.
So what are some of the ways? So let's just say it's a local restaurant as an example. What are some of the ways that they could, let's say it's a sustainability story, and they are eliminating plastic from their supplies, or what something along those lines. What are some examples of ways that they can bring that messaging through in their marketing and communications?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is to talk about it. Obviously you can do all of these amazing things, but if you're not talking about it and sharing the stories, no one knows about it. So the first thing is to be able to talk about it through all of the channels that you have. So, this restaurant may have social media accounts, that they might be on Instagram, they're probably on Facebook. So talking about it through social media is always good. On the website, obviously, talking about what they're doing in terms of eliminating single-use plastic or whatever it is. And also, probably another way to do it would be through their customers talking about it as well. That kind of third-party endorsement is always excellent for good PR. So there's some of the ways that they could do that. But I think the way to start is really to kind of have a small sort of plan, I guess, behind it. Not necessarily strategy, can be a bit of a big word, but a plan behind how they're going to communicate that. Why is the restaurant doing this? Why is it important? So rather than just saying we're eliminating plastic, why? That's pretty obvious to most people, but maybe not to everyone. So I think it's about why. How are they going about it? What are the steps that they're putting into place? And then down the track, it's really important also to talk about impact. So what is the impact? How has it gone? What does it actually mean for the environment that they've eliminated single-use plastic, for example?
And so have you got any examples that you could share of some brands that are doing this well?
I think, as I mentioned, there are brands everywhere that are kind of doing this work. I think it's increasingly, if you just scroll Instagram, you'll see so many small, medium, and large brands doing just their little bit to help, as you say, whether it is just, even as small as eliminating plastic straws. I mean, that's one thing that I've seen here where I live in Bali. The island has banned single-use plastic, actually, and so the stories that are coming out of here about connecting it to the oceans and what that actually means for the beaches has been really powerful, and really seen all of the sort of the expats and the locals get on board through that storytelling, I think, and through sort of the campaigns, really. Every shop and every restaurant you see have posters and signs, not just saying that they're banning plastic, but why and how they're helping. But in terms of, I think one of the high profile examples that just came out last week, actually, it's Monday today, so it was last week now, was Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream makers, very famous, appealing to millennials and Gen Z, really. They've really taken their ESG, or their social responsibility, and standing up for what they believe in, and they're not selling their ice cream in the occupied Palestinian territories, which is, obviously, for those people who are listening who don't know what's going on in that part of the world, there's been some ongoing conflict for years and years that recently flared up between OPT and Israel. And so Ben & Jerry's have taken a stand, and they're not selling their ice cream there anymore. And that gained a lot of media coverage, a lot of positive media coverage, a lot of consumers really coming out and applauding what they've done. And they shared that across their own social media channels, obviously, but also got some mainstream high profile media coverage, which always can help your cause, usually, if it's a positive story.
And it'd be really good to kind of understand their why, like why was that important? And I mean, sometimes, it can backfire for brands. So I wonder why they did that. Why was that important to them? Like, what's the connection? Or was it a PR stint?
I don't know, actually. I believe, that particular conflict is, it's really controversial, I would say. You're either on one side or the other.
So they could have they could have gone bad, right? They could have lost a lot of customers as a result of that.
They probably have. They probably have, to be honest. But I think that's the thing. When you really believe in something, if you really believe in a cause, or if you really believe in something that's right or wrong, then, big brands, and, Ben and Jerry's is a part of Unilever, I think. So they have money. So they're probably not so necessarily so worried about that. Obviously that's much different.
Yes, if you're definitely a small takes business, the pressure off, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You can't be, you've got to be strategic about it. I think if you're a small business taking a stand, and if you're going to lose all your customers, maybe that's not the best thing to do. Although if you really, really believe in something.
So for you, when you're creating a plan for your clients to share their message on what they're doing in that, whether it's sustainability or ethically, what sort of, is it like a 3-month plan? Is it like, do you look at all the touch points? How do you kind of approach it?
Yeah. It's usually longer. It's usually, I would usually write, a communications or a marketing strategy for 6 to 12 months. Some larger organizations, it's an 18-month plan. And what we do is we kind of sit down, and we do this kind of discovery first for a couple of hours, where I sit down with the team and whoever is kind of, important to the strategy, to get people on board and get their ideas. And we sort of talk about, like, who are the audiences? Who do we need to reach? Where do they play? Where do they listen? Where do they get their information? How can we reach them? What are the things that are important to them? We kind of start to build out a strategy based on the audience, because at the end of the day, whether it's, customer service, whether it's marketing, public relations, whatever it is, you have to understand your consumers first up, so that you can engage with them. So we kind of sit down and nut it out and really talk about the values and what we're going to share and how we're going to share it. And that becomes sort of the beginnings of a 6 to 12 month plan. Now, of course, if you write a 12-month plan now in July, not necessarily is that going to be relevant for 12 months time. So I'd always recommend to kind of do these sort of, have some milestones that you want to reach for 3, 6, 9, and 12 months, and do a check-in. A strategy is really a moving document. So it doesn't mean that you do the strategy and then you have to stick to it for 12 months. Absolutely. You need to keep coming back to it. What's working? What's not working? Is that message working? Is that channel working? Yes, no, why not? And make some changes. It's, it's something that you kind of need to be considering, each month, really. Do we have new products? Do we have new courses? Do we have new offerings? What are they? How do they fit into it? How can we communicate those? But if you have the strategy sort of up front, then that will guide most of what you're doing, and things can be adapted.
And so, PR today has, changed compared to what it used to be. So if a business is looking for the right, what are some of the ways that businesses can pitch their story, and what is the media really looking for? So if it comes to that sustainability piece as an example, how is it different, or what are some ways that you can appeal to the media?
Yeah, so when we're talking about media in this sense, we're really talking about our earned media, so media that is essentially free, or press coverage. And, one of the things that really appeals to media, if you think about it yourself, is human stories. Humans, we consume media, and, essentially, if you think about what you like to read, it's usually around, what are things that other people are doing that I can relate to or learn from, or why, or things that people are doing that's interesting, or in their backgrounds or their challenges. And I think for small businesses and brands, to being able to tell their story is what media is probably looking for, most likely. Challenges are always really good, but really a human story behind it is excellent. So if you're looking, let's just take the restaurant example again. If you're looking to get some local media in your area, the local media are probably interested in, what I said before, really, sort of your why are you doing this? What are the outcomes, and how does it help your customer? What do they get out of it as well? I think that's probably, mostly what the media is looking for. They're looking for something new. So if there's a restaurant in your area that's just been in the media last week about, banning single-use plastic or reducing their plastic, then, you're maybe not going to get into that publication the next week, because the media are always looking for new stories. So you either need to wait, or perhaps try and find a slightly different angle to pitch to them, so it's not the same story again. So the media is looking for something, that new angle. If you're doing something differently, that's always good. They love something that's different, timely. Obviously, if you can sort of attach it to something that's happening in the community, and you can time your story or your pitch around that event or around something that's happening, as even maybe as a solution, that's always a good way to get media attention. And then, of course, founder stories are always highly successful with media. They'll usually always be interested in, the background, why you set up the restaurant, what you're doing, the challenges, and why you've kind of come to this, announcement of getting rid of plastic. So I would say those are the things that the media is most kind of interested in.
It definitely feels like since COVID, that there's more and more incredible stories that we're reading about every day that are just coming into the light, which is really exciting, because it's no longer about businesses that are, pushing their branding. It's more that storytelling is coming through with some incredible stories that we see of, people just wanting to have an impact. So there's, whilst there's so many challenges with, a global pandemic, there's also some really good things that have come out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting. You just sort of triggered my memory. When you're talking about storytelling, there are, as you say, there are so many stories coming out of as I said before, every brand has a story. That's for sure, because there are humans behind brands. And what's interesting, I think, is that consumers now are less likely to really trust a brand that is sort of, their messaging is all promotional. They're more likely to trust something that comes from a story, or something that comes from telling the story of impact, or the story of what you're doing in this kind of space, rather than purely promotional. And it just reminded me of a big campaign that I worked on with a very large organization. And I was helping them with their storytelling, and we were creating some videos and some social media content. And we made the decision actually to not put the logo of this organization into any of the materials, into any of the messaging, into the video itself. We purely told a story. We didn't talk about the brand. You're watching this kind of video, you wouldn't even know who the brand was. And then so we kind of grabbed the viewer purely by the storytelling. And then, the logo came in just at the very end of the clip. And actually that's something that's happening a lot more these days. I think Nike has also done a similar campaign where they didn't put any of their branding into their storytelling. So they're, brands are really trying to engage with their consumers through storytelling, rather than through promotional pieces and chucking their logo everywhere. So it's an interesting learning, and something to keep in mind when you're considering, even small businesses and startups, when they're considering your social media strategy, telling the stories and not kind of just putting your brand front first and foremost. Obviously, there's a time and a place for that, because brand recognition is obviously very important, and Nike, everyone knows who they are. So they can do that, but there are interesting learnings for small business too, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's such an easier way to build trust, isn't it? Like, it's just, as a consumer, you're connected with, okay, they're not here to sell me something, they're actually here to build trust. And so it immediately brings the barriers down, and you're more likely to engage with that business. So there's lots of benefits.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what they say around, advertising. Obviously, advertising is important and it's not going anywhere. But, when you're looking at, advertising and public relations or the free media, that's why, brands and organizations, they really want to get into the free media, into the press, because it's that third party endorsement. It's the social proof. It's the thought that if a journalist is writing about that brand from a consumer perspective, if a journalist or a third party is writing about that brand, and it's the same with reviews. If a third party is, saying these great things about a brand, it instills much more trust than if you're looking at their own social media posts or their own advertorials or their own websites. So
100%.
It's definitely important.
Well, that's been awesome, Jackie. Thank you for sharing your insights. That'll be really valuable for our listeners.
I hope so.
Thank you. Yeah. And so how can we get in touch with you?
So you can get in touch with me via my website, which is humankindadvisory.com. That's the best way. I mostly help organizations there, or nonprofits and NGOs, and helping them influence. I'm actually about to launch a new advisory agency purely for brands and consumer brands and startups, which is called Hey Lily, and that will be launching in the next couple of months. And so that's a new offering, purely for the consumer audience. So stay tuned for that.
That sounds exciting. So Hey Lily, tell me the story behind that name.
The story behind that name is that when I was a baby, for some reason, my mum wanted, my name is obviously not Lily, but that's what she called me. It was like a nickname. She tried to make it stick till I was about 10. No one else called me Lily in my whole life except my mum. I've got birthday cards from her, like, "Dear Lily." And I hated it. I really, really hated it. And eventually, she kind of gave up. And here we are, however many years later, 25 years later, I'm honoring that. I think beautiful. It's a nice name, Hey Lily. So that's where that came from.
I love it. Great story. Thanks, Jackie. It's been great chatting to you today.
Yes.
Talk
Thank
to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
The Brag Effect is brought to you by Brag Reviews, the review management software that helps businesses improve their reputations, one review at a time. Check it out at bragreviews.com.